say you are car shopping. You go to a dealership and start negotiating discount. How much can you shave off asking price? Now, be realistic. How much of a discount can you get? 33%, 5%, 10% on a new car. And when you go new house shopping, by how much can you drive the price down? Talking to a real estate agent, making offers, counter offers, and so forth. And what kind of discount do you think you can get in Russia these days for new cars and new real estate, new houses? For new cars and new apartments in Russia, in the south of Russia, in a normal Russian city, how about 55%? That's right, 55% off. For both brand new car and a brand new apartment in the city of Rostov-on-Don. That's what I offered this past week. By a car dealer, new car dealer, and by a real estate agent selling new apartments. 55%. Not too shabby. The reason? No money. Russia is out of money, and it shows. It shows anywhere you look these days. The economic train of Russia has finally arrived at the station, and that is dead end. Welcome to Weekly Economic Update from Russia. The economy is changing so fast these days that every single week there's plenty to talk about and to inform. And this is week 29 in review, and if you want numbers, figures, and events, then stick around because I have plenty of that coming up just about now. Howdy everyone, my name is Konstantin, welcome to Inside Russia, the YouTube channel where usual Russia is explained by the unusual Russian. As usual, you will not find any BS propaganda or lies here. You will find the truth, common sense, and logic, and some emotions too. I'm a human being after all. The economy, well, I give you economic analysis of Russia, and I think it's the most important thing in Russia right now, because the economy is the foundation of everything in the society, including the war Putin is waging on Ukraine. So it's changing so much. It's declining, it's landsliding so much that I give you the updates every week. Now, the economy can be analyzed at three main levels, each with its own scope and focus. They are individual level, also called microeconomic agents. It studies individuals, households, and businesses. Then, microeconomic level studies specific sectors of market and macroeconomy, macroeconomic level. It studies entire national economy, so to speak, the health, general health of the economy. And this is how I structure my weekly economic updates here at Inside Russia. And this is July 23rd. And I review week 29. And I start with microeconomic agents. Basically, it's about what impact changes in the economy have on lives of regular folks. I have a very good follow-up example today. I love following up things. Things I talk or forecast about in my previous streams. I want to follow up on those. And today is one of those follow-ups. And I'll remind you the story. Just 2 weeks ago, I was approached for consultation, advice. A person I know in Rostov-on-Don was very confused. And the local market where had been going for shopping for the last 15 years, major changes started happening. They were 12 food kiosks selling various foods, and 3 of them closed. That was the beginning of July. There were a fairly large number of farmers coming in on certain days, bringing their products, dairy, meat, honey, other foods. And in a few recent weeks, half of the farmers stopped coming. The selection of the food has shrunk. And that's what we talked about a couple of weeks ago, a little over a couple of weeks ago. Just 2 weeks ago. And now we had a different conversation yesterday. The update is all food kiosks have closed since our first conversation in just 2 weeks. And farmers who come to sell their food, they don't come anymore. Well, some of them do, but they come significantly less often and so fewer of them. And the most sellers at that farmer market are individuals that bring portable, roll-out tables with them. And they put up tables, put newspaper on top or some kind of cloth, and they sell things off the tables. And that's how I remember most of the street sales were done. We didn't have any stores in the 90s. They were done like that. So this is the return to the 90s. And this is the latest from Bataysk, one of the suburbs of Rostov-on-Don. So if you ever happen to be there, go and check it out, the local farmers market, and you'll be surprised by the changes. Now, let's move to microeconomic level, microeconomy. And this is where I usually talk of industries. So let's start with metallurgical industry and scrap metal. Prices for ferrous scrap metal dropped to 15,250 rubles per metric ton. That's $194 per ton. And it is the minimum since the summer of 2020. That was the very heart of the COVID crisis in Russia, where everything was locked down. Basically, during COVID-19 pandemic, Russia stopped functioning and the economy dropped significantly. So for the scrap metal prices, we are back to the COVID-19 times where economy is practically dead. This is lower than the cost of the billet, which is over 21,000 ruble per ton or 267 US dollars for complex scrap types of scrap metal. The main reason is the decline in the production of electrically made steel, which consumes about 90% of scrap metal. The volume of scrap collection in 2025 may decrease to 12 million tons against 17.7 million tons in 2024. The production of electrically made steel will fall to 18 million tons from 23 million in the last year. The demand for construction steel rolled products that uses scrap metal the most decreased by around 20% this year. Rebar prices dropped to 35,000 rubles per ton. That's 446 US dollars per metric ton. The industry's problems are compounded by the delays in payments for suppliers. The payments now take somewhere from 6 to 9 months. Basically, you produce rebar products, and you ship them, or and then you are not paid for 6 months. That's a normalcy in Russia right now. Even subsidiaries of large metallurgical plants, very solid companies, now they're looking for third-party buyers due to the lack of orders. And without recovery in demand for construction products, increase in scrap metal prices is very unlikely. Now, not just the scrap metal is in trouble. the price has fallen and the quantity collected is fallen, The metallurgical plants that produce steel from ore, using ore. In general, in Russia, production of steel fell by 8.6% last year, and in the first quarter of the first half of 2024, it fell another 7.2%. The trend is obvious. The trend is there. Different metallurgical plants are in trouble. Well, actually, all of them in trouble. It's just one plant located in Donetsk region, the land that used to be Ukraine and was stolen by Russia. That plant, its management, perhaps shareholders, are demanding, not asking, but demanding from Putin to assist the plant. And the kind of assistance that they are offering is very odd. They are demanding to oblige all customers, their customers, to buy at least 25% of their steel from that metallurgical plant. So basically, they want the government to step in and to apply quotas to customers who buy steel, so they buy a certain amount from this metallurgical plant in Donetsk. Now, I'd love to see that happening. And then, to be fair, I must say that's a fairly small metallurgical plant. Another Russia's metallurgical plant, big one, huge one, MMK, Magnitka, second largest in Russia and one of the largest in the world, decreased its output by 18% in second quarter of 2025. It has showed net loss of 1.2 billion rubles. That's around $15.5 million in second quarter alone. That spells trouble, and it's something very expected by anyone who is, taking interest to look at the industry. About 4 weeks ago, there was an international economic forum in St. Petersburg, Russia's largest economic event these years. And they were shareholders, the owners, and CEOs of all metallurgical plants in Russia. And one of the CEOs openly said, publicly addressing, the audience in one of the open table sessions there, that all Russian metallurgical plants are on the verge of closing doors. And now we're seeing it, we're getting proof of that with the numbers. Now let's talk about something different. How would you like a Russian beer? Just know that it doesn't come cheap. You gotta pay for it. The quality, well, some Russians like it. No, thank you. But still, it's expensive. Beer in Russia has soared in price due to rising excise taxes, the cost of logistics and raw materials going up. According to the results of the first quarter of 2025, beer rose in price by around 30%. And that's not just beer. It's general situation in all other industries as well, in civil industries. Perhaps in the military-industrial complex as well. You see, inflation is skyrocketing. Prices for everything are going up, domestic and foreign. And logistics are a mess right now in Russia. So there you have it. You have all main components increasing in price, and then therefore you must raise price for your products. That's how it works. Well, let's talk about cars now. Russian car dealers have accumulated 500,000 unsold new cars in warehouses all over the country. Talking of overstocking, super overstocking. The crisis in the car market is intensifying. Despite deep discounts, I was called by a dealer from Rostov-on-Don. Remember, to people inside Russia, I am still inside Russia, because they don't know I left. So they are soliciting me with all kinds of orders, emailing and calling. In Russia, it's usual. You get a call and someone says, would you like to get a new dentist? Go and do your teeth done at this place. Would you like to buy an apartment? Would you like to take your child to a new school? Things like that. They sell left and right, calling your phones. So I got a call, and I was a dealer from Rostov-on-Don, and he offered me 55% off a brand new car. Just like that, without me much talking, He definitely attracted my attention. But at the end, I'm sorry, but I said no. So these deep discounts and other dealer offers, they offer you free extra tires and things like that, free insurance. Russian people are unwilling to buy more new cars. The stock has hardly decreased in the first 6 months of 2025. That means that discounts that are offering right now on new cars will remain in the second half of the year. And most likely they will increase because, hey, they got to sell at least something. From the reports that coming in, they're not selling anything. Forget about 25% drop that I was talking about in January. Now it's pretty bad. Russian economy is at that dead end, and then people are feeling it. Well, they're the first ones who are feeling it, actually. The dealers will continue to lose money. According to Sergei Tselikov, the CEO of the analytical agency Autostat, things are not well. He summed up the results of June quite nicely. During the month, 13,500 more passenger cars were produced and imported to Russia than sold. And by the end of this first half year, the stock has amounted to 500,000 cars. Over the last few months, it decreased only by about 30,000 units. Imagine that, 30,000 cars. They have a lot of cars in Russia. They're sitting at parking lots right now. Tselikov said that this is the good news for Russian consumers, as the manufacturers, well, there's only one manufacturer really, and the importers will have to sell out in the second half of the year. And that means deeper discounts, better offers for Russian people. But for dealers, the struggle of surviving is just beginning. It will definitely escalate. So he says it's good for Russian consumers. And I say it is not. Russian consumers aren't buying because they are waiting out for deeper discounts towards the end of the year, that type of thing. They just don't have money to buy the cars. Minus 55%. And probably if I negotiated further, if I showed interest, he'd probably give me more deeper discount, more than 55%. 55. Have you ever heard anything like that? You go to a Toyota dealer and look at the new Camry, it costs $25,000, and then a salesperson jumps onto you, says, well, you know what? Take it for 12.5. And then he looks at you and goes, hey, I'll shave another 1,000, take it for 11.5. Wow. Russian parliament isn't really helping the motorists, The senators just adopted a bill on increasing state duties for drivers starting September 1st. In particular, prices for obtaining a car passport increased from 800 rubles to 1,200 rubles by 30%. Prices for modification of a previously issued car title increased from 350 rubles to 525 rubles. The price of issuance of a transport registration certificate will increase from 1,500 rubles up to, from 15 to 4,500 rubles. That's 300%. Issuance of a national driver's license will increase from 2,000 rubles to 4,000 rubles. That's 100% increase. Issuance of an international driver's license will increase from 1,600 rubles to 3,200 rubles. That's 100% increase. The senators are doing that because, well, obviously they're told to do that. In the beginning of January of this year, I forecasted that the Russian state will be using every single method possible to get money out of Russian people, out of the taxpayers. Increased fines, duties, taxes, you name it. And that's what they've been doing. Consistently, month after month, they've been increasing everything in prices, from the tariffs of the utilities to driver's license. And these fees for driver's license permits and car titles and all of that, it reminds, and the car prices, reminds me of old USSR. Back then, cars were simply unaffordable. Just to give you an example, my dad was a qualified worker. He was in charge of a dozen of train agents and a large combine harvester manufacturer. He was on the very top there, you know. And then he was making from anywhere from 150 to 220 rubles. That's 220 on a good month, you know. And the car cost around 10,000 rubles. So imagine that. About 40 months of just saving money, not eating, not spending a ruble on anything. Simply unaffordable. And then Russians are getting back there, right there, where cars become unaffordable and they can't buy them any longer because they don't have any money. And on top of that, the senators and the Russian officials are not making it any easier to own a car. Now, a very, very quick piece of news, but a very important one. The gap between salaries in Russia's provinces in different regions has reached a record high. Now, in some provinces, average salaries differ from other provinces greatly, okay? The gap now in 2025 is a record 182,000 rubles, meaning in some provinces, Russian people make 182,000 rubles less than in others. This is 25% more than a year earlier. For example, in Chukotka, the average salary is 223,000 rubles, and that's far north of Russia. And in Ingushetia, that's the Caucasus, one of the provinces in the Caucasus, 41,000 rubles. 223,000, 41,000. That's incredible. It is a bad indicator. It is showing that Russian economy is feverish. It's not well. Imagine average salary in Maine, $40,000 per year. And in Colorado, it's $223,000 per year. And that's the major indicator that something in the economy is majorly wrong. Another interesting piece of news. In Russia, advertising of bankruptcy services for individuals, including bankruptcy attorneys, will be banned starting from January 1st, 2026. The relevant law was adopted by the parliament. Now, I know you're wondering. I know I was wondering too. Why? Why in the world they would ban advertising of professionals, legal, educated, registered, licensed professionals that help people to go through personal bankruptcies? Why would they do that? Well, I know why. I'll tell you why. A rising wave of personal bankruptcies is on the way. We have been seeing the signs for the past 18 months, well, perhaps even more. But now the situation is dire. And the state doesn't want people to be informed of their rights. Therefore, it bans, outlaws basically, advertising of legal services for people who are in financial troubles. Now, it's a small piece of news, but that's a small piece of puzzle that fits perfectly well into this big picture of Russia's economy, grand demise and destruction. Now, let's talk of real estate. Oh, love real estate. The sales of new construction, in particular, that's what I want to talk about right now. How about less 56% of sales in units in June 2025 compared to June 2024? 56% fewer sales. In units, 82,000 units sold in June 2024 and 36,000 sold in June of 2025. In money, 650 billion rubles in 2024, 330 billion rubles in 2025 so far. You know what it means for the companies who build and sell? Less revenue, less money, but the increased costs. Because of the inflation, you have to maintain a certain amount of personnel to sell the apartments, to finish constructing them, to commence them, to do all the paperwork with the government and so forth. And those people are not getting paid less. The inflation is skyrocketing. Everyone is demanding more pay now. But the money coming in is so much less than before. What does it spell for you? To me, it spells trouble, big trouble for the developers, real estate developers. And it spells actually disaster, and it spells bankruptcies, and it spells Russian real estate market falling apart like a card house. And you know what? The proof, real proof for that, real life proof is a call from a solicitor to offer 55% discount on an apartment in Rostov-on-Don. I was offered deep discounts before, both in Rostov and in Moscow, and you know what? That's the deepest. That's the freshest. They have tons of overstock in new apartments in Rostov, in Moscow too. I think all over in Russia, because who can afford mortgage at 25, 27, 28%, and who can have cash in their pockets these days to just go and buy an apartment? Actually, Russian banks still offer around 19, 20, well, now less than that, from 16 to 18% return on deposits. And instead of buying an apartment, it's much easier to go to a bank, if you're risky, of course, if you like risk, and just put a deposit in a Russian bank. Used to be perfectly safe. I did it myself years ago. Russia has America's equivalent of FDIC, federal insurance of bank accounts, okay? But I don't think it's safe anymore. Anyway, I'll talk later of the looming banking crisis. Now, large producer. Now, what goes hand in hand with construction of new houses, apartments? Now, production of steel products such as rebar and rolled steel and things like that, and the production of cement. And the large producer, in general, cement industry is also in trouble, and it's used in the construction, of course, in Russia. The sales are down by 8% in the first half of 2025. A large producer of cement called Belgorod Cement has closed its doors. The management is saying, oh, it's temporary, but I know how temporary it is. In Russia, they say there's nothing more permanent than temporary. Okay, so goodbye, Belgorod Cement. And I think other cement plants and companies are on the way there, following Belgorod Cement. Now, let's talk a bit about agricultural news. Love those too. I have a couple stories with numbers and figures for you. Now, Russia runs on two things. Well, three things really. First thing is bread, wheat. Second thing is potatoes. And the third thing, I guess, is vodka. But let's put vodka aside for now. Now, wheat and potatoes. Potatoes are... I've spoken about potatoes before. It's a very odd story. For the first time in history, Russia started importing potatoes. Oh well. The land of wonders, I call it. Now let's talk about wheat. This is the height of the harvest of wheat in Russia. It starts July 1st because the weather, it's the climate of Russia. They plant wheat in April, and then they start harvesting it July 1st. This is a really, really busy, hot time for wheat farmers. So far, wheat production isn't looking good for this year. In 2024, in the first 10 days of July, the farmers harvested 25 million metric tons of wheat. 2024, that was. In 2025, in the same period, in the first 10 days, they only harvested 11 million metric tons. The yield per hectare has dropped from 4 metric tons per hectare to 3.4 metric tons per hectare. I'm not saying that Russia will not have bread this winter, but I definitely am seeing troubles. The harvest this year will be so much less. And it means huge blows for farmers, wheat farmers. And that's a huge blow for Russian economy because, so less taxes will be generated. So less wheat will be sold overseas this year. So it's not good. And another thing I'd like to talk about is eggs. Eggs are important. Now, I want you to mark my words down. I'll mark them myself. Eggs. Because somewhere around New Year, I will come back to this live stream and to this situation with eggs. There's no problem with eggs in Russia right now. Don't worry. Russians are having plenty of eggs and quite cheap. There's a different problem. That is going to create a problem with eggs in the future. I know. Let me explain. Now, about a year and a half ago, there was a crisis in the eggs industry. Price for eggs started going up, skyrocketing. And, Russians aren't used to expensive eggs because along with potatoes and bread, eggs are needed. It's a basic staple food for Russians, you have eggs, you have some flour, you can bake stuff. You're not going to go hungry. So very, Very important for a lot of Russians, especially for those who don't have much money. Now, all of a sudden, Russians found themselves in a situation where they had to pay pretty penny for eggs in the December of 2023. And then the government stepped in and they said, you know what? People are angry. People are getting overexcited. It is in the news. Let's change that. Let's put a ceiling on the price of eggs. Let's install price control. And they did. And that took care of the problem for some time. But you know what? Price control doesn't work. We saw that in the USSR, and at the end, the USSR fell apart. It is wrong and is not effective. Nothing good will happen out of price control. You know what's happening now? Russian farmers, the producers of egg, well, companies that have chickens that make eggs, they are slaughtering chickens by tens of thousands. Because, well, simple economics. Right now, to sell one egg to a store, you pay about 3.5 rubles. But to make egg, to feed the chickens, to pay the salaries and so forth, it costs 5 rubles. So on every egg, farmers lose money. In some cases, they lose more. In some cases, they lose less. And therefore, they are slaughtering chickens and they are selling them as meat. And that's it. So far, I have heard of reports from different provinces. It's not just one producer of eggs. It's multiple reports coming in. And right now, I have heard of a few tens of thousands of chickens being slaughtered already. Because it's simply not profitable to be in the egg business. You know what it means for Russia in a few months? It's pretty obvious. Amazingly enough, the Minister of Agriculture announced that she hasn't heard of the crisis in the egg industry, and she says that everything is fine. I'm marking my words down, and I'm also marking her words down. And I'll get back to this egg story in quite a few months, closer to the new year. Now, let's jump to the banking industry. These are rumors, but I think they're trustworthy, and I personally think it's true. 3 major state-owned or partially state-owned banks, one of, 3 of largest Russia's banks, have asked the state for bailout. The source of this information is Bloomberg. It's been all over the news in the last few days. I believe Bloomberg. I believe the sources of Bloomberg. And I have been forecasting the problems for Russian banking industry. And what it takes is the first bank to go, and then this domino effect will be initiated. They'll start falling like the industry will fall like card house. So now we start seeing things happening. Now, before we were talking about them, but no forecasting needed any longer. Just informing, monitoring the situation and informing. Another big problem, and it concerns multiple industries, both private and state industries. Salaries non-payments. One of the biggest things, like when I came to the United States of America and I started working, I think it was 96, 97. I had my first real job in 97. I was afraid of one thing, that the employer would not pay me on time. It was so widespread in Russia. Time comes to get your paycheck, and your employer says, well, I don't have any money. I'll have money come in 2 weeks, so wait. And you wait because you have nothing else to do. There were no laws that protected you. And basically you were at mercy of your employer. Okay, so salary non-payments were very widespread. But since early 2000s in Russia, they have forgotten about salary non-payments. First of all, they tweaked, they fine-tuned the laws. Now it is a criminal offense, a crime, not to pay salaries in time. And basically, the economic situation improved to a point where it was not never a concern, just like in the United States. In 2000s, for us, it was never a concern. We all were paid in time. Now, the reports are coming in that there are cases of salaries non-payments in Russia. Like I said, both in private and state-owned enterprises. Russia's only producer of TV sets called Quant owes some workers salaries for up to 6 months now. The reason? No one buys Quant's TV sets for different reasons, and therefore Quant doesn't have any money to pay salaries, and the banks don't loan money to Quant because it's not reliable. Its situation is dire. Now, as I said, it's a criminal offense, and some criminal cases have been opened against the top management of Quant. There are about $800,000 unpaid wages, salaries, and people are suing Quant. It's going to be a big mess. Now, another report is from Khakassia. Khakassia is a province in the east of Russia. And you know what? They owe school children, they owe school teachers in school salary for June. It's, third week of July now, and the teachers have not been paid for June. They are promised to be paid until the end of July, but, promise is a promise, and the money is money in your hand. So, same thing with kindergarten teachers, school teachers, and kindergarten teachers. I remind you that in Krasnoyarsk province and in Kuzbas province, they started firing kindergarten school teachers and medical staff, medical personnel, about 3 months ago, because the provincial budgets simply didn't have money to pay salaries. And now, instead of firing, some provinces simply don't pay them their salaries. Okay, and the debt starts piling up. I remember it very well. In the 90s, early 90s, that was a huge problem. Even pensions were not paid months at the time. So it is happening, and it's a sign of the demise. When I say the demise of Russian economy, this is what I mean. When people don't get paid, they work, they create product value, but they don't get paid. That's one of the faces of the demise. And another interesting piece of news, Vladimir Putin, Russian president, ordered the economy to not decline. I kid you not. He made an order, a written order, for the economy to not decline. He obliged the government to implement a few policies, and they are so absurd. But you know what? That's good enough to be talked about in more details in the upcoming live stream. So please stay tuned. This stuff is gold. If I wanted to make things like that up, I couldn't. Okay, because they're the gold. Steve Martin, are you watching? Write these things down, make a comedy out of it. Now, enough about microeconomy, enough about industries, companies. Let's talk about macro. Ooh, macro is good stuff. It's basically key economic indicators, general economic indicators that give you the general idea of how, what is the health of economy at any given time. Now, not much to talk about macro level. Couple things. First thing is inflation in Russia. For the first time since September of 2024, inflation is not inflation, it's deflation. No, inflation when your prices are rising, deflation when they actually dropping, going down. So for the first time in quite a few months, there's deflation in Russia. Russian economy is doing great. That's it. Done deal. Putin has delivered. Russian economy has circumvented sanctions and all of that stuff. No. Thing is, deflation happens in Russia every single July and August, sometimes September. And that is driven by summertime is the time when in Russia farmers harvest. And they harvest fruits and vegetables in large quantities and they make them available to the markets. There's a lot of, you can get lots of free stuff if you live in the south of Russia. For example, we never bought apricots because apricots in Rostov-on-Don, in a large city, they grow everywhere on streets, okay? Like palm trees in LA, in Russia, in Rostov-on-Don, it's apricots. And if you get outside of the city, you find all kinds of stuff. We called it wild apples, wild apricots, and then there are gardens, and tens of thousands of acres of farmland, and everything is grown. So when all of a sudden, in massive quantities, that fresh produce, is like it floods the markets, the prices drop down. The price for tomatoes, let's say, a few years ago was at the height of the off-season, the peak of the off-season was just, for example, in Rostov, 80 rubles. You can buy tomatoes in July for 5 rubles per kilo. Do you see the difference? Massive amounts. And then July and August is usually time when our moms and grandmas, got lots of fruits and veggies and they would can them to prepare for winter. And this is a very normal situation when the food prices drop, produce prices drop, and they drive inflation down, and inflation become deflation sometimes. So from July 15th to July 21st, the deflation in Russia was, inflation was minus 0.05%. Tiny little bit in the negative, it's not really good news because it's the lowest the deflation has ever been. Because in the previous years, the deflation was much bigger. Smaller deflation shows you that the inflation in general is so much higher year to year, okay? And this is not good. This is a sign of very high inflation, galloping inflation. The second news is, it comes from the Russian parliament, upper chamber. Anatoly Artamonov, the chairman of upper chamber's budget committee, said that in this past week that in Russian federal budget, it is possible to find a reserve of up to 2 trillion rubles and direct the money, those 2 trillion rubles, newly found, to finance countries' priorities, mainly defense and security. He said, I quote, "We have one task for the whole country. You will have to add money to solve this task in order to finish it faster. You see the problem, but you kind of ignore it." And he was addressing the senators. So that's what Artamonov said this past week. This decision may be unpopular, he acknowledged. In 2025, Russian federal budget spends 13.5 trillion rubles on defense, and even without redistribution of this budget money. So they already have planned 13.5 trillion rubles. Now they want to find some other places in the federal budget, 2 more trillion rubles, and add them to the defense part of the budget. According to Automotive, redistribution, it's a fancy word for taking from teachers and medics and doctors and putting it into the military-industrial complex. That's what they call redistribution. Will be achieved by eliminating inefficient spending and maximizing the use of all sources of income. Now, what are inefficient spendings? Of course, the school teachers, the kindergarten teachers, the university professors, the medical doctors, the medical personnel, probably the federal employees who work at the government services and the city services and that, and things like that, And what is maximizing the use of all sources of income? That's increasing taxes, fines, and fees. And there's not much else, okay? Now, we are seeing his words already. These words, eliminating inefficient spendings, that we are seeing in Khakassia, where they're not paying salaries to school teachers and kindergarten teachers. Okay? We are seeing maximizing the use of all sources of income. The state increases fees for motorists, increases taxes. Wow. This guy's speech and as move, it's not so much of a speech, it's a move, it's a public move, it's a message to the lawmakers, to the high officials. Let's squeeze more money out of Russian businesses and Russian people. We need to, we don't have money, get us the money. It proves that Russian economy in such dire situation that they trying to deprive school teachers out of their salaries, not high salaries, Now, enough about macro stuff. The last thing I'd like to talk about, and then I made the title of this video, is will the 18th sanctions package finish Russian economy off? The last news is about the 18th European sanctions package against Russian economy. Now, let me give you a little history first. Russia invaded Ukraine on 24th of February 2022. The very next day, the European leaders and the American leaders came out, and basically the world leaders, the leaders of the developed countries came out and said, what, Russia, you can't do that. You've got to stop. We're going to punish you. And we will start with economic sanctions. And they started placing different economic sanctions. Right now, Russia, it soon became, and it remains, the most sanctioned country in the history of mankind. No one knows how many sanctions exactly. The last number I heard a year and a half ago was 16,000 different sanctions, economic and other sanctions placed on Russia. And they started hurting Russian economy. Now, some sanctions were more efficient than others, and some were less efficient, but combined, they started taking effect. And now, this is the 18th package of sanctions. There have been 17 before. The 18th, and it's a very serious, very strong package of sanctions. Very serious one. Now, it serves 4 major blows to Russian economy. First of all, a new price ceiling, updated price ceiling for Russian oil. As you know, in December of 2022, the European Union, I think it was package number 6, introduced the ceiling for Russian oil, for sale of Russian oil. Basically, no country can buy Russian oil at more than 60% $60 per gallon. I'm sorry. $60 per barrel. Now, Russia has been trying to avoid it. It's created a shadow fleet. It's hired lots of international oil pirates, why I call them pirates, the tanker owners, and they've been transporting Russian oil despite the sanctions. But nevertheless, a huge blow was served. Okay, and Russia lost a great deal of its oil income. Now, the new package, the new sanction, dictates new terms for the ceiling. Before it was $60 per barrel. Now it'll be calculated as average for some prior period, let's say for 2 or 3 months, I don't know the details. And 15% from that average amount will be deducted. So basically, it is a floating price ceiling. Then sanctions against those helping Russians circumvent at certain price. Now the price goes up and down with the market. This obviously is more effective and more efficient type of sanctions. And the Europeans also decided to start going after those companies and individuals that actually helping Russia to circumvent the sanctions, and particularly the Indians. A lot of Indians have been buying Russian oil and reselling it to Europe, or refining it and selling, refined products to Europe. Currently, Russia sells 1.5 million barrels every month to India. It's Russia's largest customer. China comes number second at 1 million per month, 1 million barrels, and everyone else gets only 900,000 barrels. So it's India, China, and everyone else. And Europeans are going after Indians. They have just placed a large oil refinery, Indian oil refinery, for helping Russia to circumvent sanctions. And Indians got spooked. They are, they have just announced that they're ready to give up buying Russian oil whatsoever. So that's going to be a tremendous blow. And even if they continue buying, that's still a blow, because they won't be buying as much, and the price has fallen. Now, the second blow from this 18th package is the ban of any deals on Northern Stream gas pipeline going from Russia to Germany. It's been shut down since August of 2022, and Russia was using Nord Stream as a geopolitical weapon. Well, Putin made a mistake. Russia has not been supplying any natural gas through Nord Stream since Russia actually stopped supplying in late August of 2022. And then Nord Stream was blown up by someone unknown. They haven't found who did it. So anyway, it's out of commission. But there have been talks between the USA and Russia. Yeah, I know. This is crazy. But on possibly Russia selling Nord Stream to Americans. And I heard the company Chevron surfaced once, quite some time ago. And there have been some kind of rumors and discussions and news and negotiations. What if the Americans buy Nord Stream and start buying Russian natural gas and transporting it through Nord Stream into Germany? So that becomes kind of a American natural gas, not Russian. And then they buy, let's say, $20 per whatever ton, and they sell it for $23, and then they have their own margin. I take it Russia is very interested because that's an additional source of revenue. Russia's lost nearly all, 90% of its revenues coming from natural gas. And Putin would be delighted to do that. And of course, if Americans, I'd say American crooks, because they would be not honest people doing that, right? If the crooks would do that, they would help Putin tremendously to get out of this economic disaster he's in right now. Okay, so Europeans have put full stop to that. They have banned on any deals, further deals on Nord Stream and I think Nord Stream 2. So, full stop. I salute you, the Europeans. Then 22 Russian banks were switched off, cut off SWIFT. SWIFT is an international banking system, basically allowing to transfer money easily. If you are off SWIFT, you have a very hard time transferring money from one country to another, to anywhere basically in the world. Now, it's not the end of the world. Russian companies are still using some banks to make payments to China, but the Chinese, they are oriented towards SWIFT. If you don't have SWIFT, then it's still possible, but it's so much more difficult, so much more expensive, and it's so much more long. It's much longer than if you have SWIFT. SWIFT transfers are easy and fast. Non-SWIFT is basically, well, it makes lives of many Russian companies and Russian state much more difficult and much more expensive. This package of sanctions that Europeans have just created, the new one, is potential last nail in the lid of Russia's economy coffin. Okay, there is a saying in Russia that's about the lid, and let's keep our eyes open. This very well could become the straw that will break camel's back. Now, Russian economy turned out to be a camel, very resilient, very strong, very resourceful. But you know what? Just like camel needs water, once in a while at least, it can go without water for long distances. Russian economy also needs to make money, okay, to get some revenues. And if it's deprived for revenues, it can go for so long, but it cannot go forever. And now we are seeing the end of this so long. And the Europeans have just enacted a new package of sanctions that is very, 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 very effective. There's one concern, how well those sanctions will be enforced. Universally, the enforcer was the USA, the Office for Foreign Asset Control, part of the US government. Elon Musk came and fired everyone, and Americans are not monitoring Russia circumventing sanctions and punishes, and Americans not punishing them any longer. Then, let's wait and see what happens, because I still believe that the sanctions will be enforced one way or another. So I rate them as very strong and very serious. And let's keep our eyes open. Please stay tuned to Inside Russia Economic Reviews every Wednesday. And thank you very much for watching today. Carthago delenda est.